Hello, and welcome to the Research into Action series. I'm Venessa Keesler, an education research consultant hired by the Grand Valley Charter School office, and today's topic is cybersecurity. But before we dive into that exciting topic, I want to remind you that the Grand Valley Charter School office also does their own research and makes it available to you. You see the QR code on the screen. You can learn more about the research projects that have happened and that are ongoing. And the Grand Valley Charter School office uses this research to support schools and to provide oversight and to help ensure best practices happening and give you that evidence so you have it as school leaders. If you've been watching any of the Research into Actions, you know I always start with these reminders about research in general. And one of the reasons we do this series is because it can be hard to know if the research you're looking at is good research, not so good research, or not even really research at all. And there's three big things to remember. Research varies in quality. There's a lot of research that only looks at associations, how things kind of relate to each other, but they don't show cause and effect. And so why that's important is if the research doesn't show cause and effect, then you can't say, oh, we know if we do this thing, this other result will definitely happen. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is important when educators are faced with picking practices that are proven to work to understand the level of evidence available to you. And then the final point is research is science, so it's always evolving. We might talk about something today, and then in 6 months, there might be some new research and there's new evidence on a given topic. That being said, the topic of today, cybersecurity, is one where I would not necessarily call this research. In the sense where somebody did a study or, created a program and implemented it to test its effectiveness, because cybersecurity is a bit of a different issue. Cybersecurity is about understanding threats to our data, to our information, and then how to best address them and prevent them. And so this is really more of a best practices toolkit and an explanation of some of the resources available from the federal level. So that's the other thing that today we'll do is expose you to a lot of resources. Cybersecurity is a very technical topic. There's a lot of pieces to it. But the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which is America's cyber defense agency, has been specifically charged with producing resources for K-12 education to use to engage in cybersecurity. Because there's this acknowledgement that education professionals probably aren't experts on cybersecurity. And so the resource that they have produced and that we'll rely on heavily today, Protecting Our Future, Partnering to Safeguard K-12 Organizations from Cybersecurity Threats. And then within that report and that website, which I have here on the screen, there are many links to one-pagers, to other resources. So if you're watching this, I'm presuming it's because you are worried about cybersecurity, and I would encourage you to spend time on this website because a lot of what I'm going to do today is going to point you at other resources. Just to remind us all why cybersecurity is an important topic for us as educators to care about. Obviously the use of technology has increased vastly in the last couple decades, and then the pandemic accelerated that even further. And technology is helpful and useful to learning. So even after the pandemic and remote learning decreased, there's an acknowledgement that all these online, cloud-based, etc. modalities help with learning for many students. We also collect more data, both official data collections and then information that is gathered as part of using different data tools or different websites. And so this all means there's just an increased amount of presence online and amount of data that is occurring. I already mentioned CISA, but there was a specific act passed by the federal government in 2021, the K-12 Cybersecurity Act, and it told CISA to study cybersecurity risks and create guidelines, trainings, and toolkits in acknowledgement of this work that needed to happen. Just a bit of data, reported incidents of cybersecurity issues have risen from 400 in 2018 to over 1,300 in 2021, but it's acknowledged that there's vast underreporting of incidents. And that's actually, spoiler alert, one of the main recommendations of this report is to report incidents of cybersecurity issues, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then if you're like, well, what's a cybersecurity issue? Here's here's a few. Student data breaches of teacher or educator information, ransomware attacks, business email compromise scams, denial of service attacks, website and social media defacement, and online class or school meeting invasions. Okay, let's dive into the findings. And I'll just acknowledge at the outset, this might be a little bit dry, but again, protecting our online assets, protecting our data, and protecting our cybersecurity is critically important. So hang with me, and then maybe take some time after the presentation to go back through the links or to sit with a small team and look at these recommendations. Because I think digesting them for people who aren't cybersecurity experts will take that kind of additional work. So let's dive into recommendation 1, which is investing in the most impactful security measures. When the CISA did this report, they gathered all this data, information, they looked at all the threats, they analyzed different pieces of evidence, and they came up with a pretty long list of things that schools really need to do. And then they pulled together groups of educators, chief information officers, just people working in the K-12 space. And one of the points of feedback that they got was, this is way too much. You know, schools don't have resources, time, staff expertise. So you have to help us focus. And that's why this report is structured around the highest priority security measures. There's about 6 of them, and then other ones you can work on over time. So acknowledging that 6 is still a lot of high priority things, but that if you were going to do 1 or 2 or 3 things, pick from this shortened list and focus on doing those well. The first is to implement multi-factor authentication. I know that as humans in the world, multi-factor authentication drives us nuts, but it is one of the key defenses against cybersecurity attacks. So if you don't have that enabled in your systems, there is a resource here that tells you more about how, or gives you some places to call. But that is the number 1 step. They were like, if you do nothing else, make sure this is enabled. Second, identify and fix known security flaws with a priority given to those that are being actively used by malicious actors. And I was like, how would one know what those are? But luckily, they've created this known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. And the website is there. This is why I say part of what you'll want to do after this presentation is go back and look through these websites. And I also found it a little amusing. You know, people tend to tease educators for all of our jargon, but it's clear that we left educator world and went into cybersecurity world, and now there's a whole different kind of jargon. Known exploited vulnerabilities, for example. But regardless, there's a catalog out there of what is happening right now. So the step for you as an educator is to look at that and then do whatever the security issue. Third high priority step is to perform and test backups of your data. So you need to make sure that whatever data you have stored on your system can be easily restored from your backups. And even before that, there's a recommendation, which I thought was really smart. Make sure what data is on your system. You know, do an inventory or talk to your person who helps with data. Like, again, you all have different setups for how you're handling this, but you should know what data you're storing, and then you should know how it's backed up. And then the 4th one is minimize exposure to common attacks. This is another place where CISA has made a service that I think is helpful to make this easier for K-12 educators who don't do this as a profession. They have this vulnerability scanning service. It's their cyber hygiene services. And it will help you do a regular scan of your vulnerabilities. So you can sign up, it's free. And again, they've done the cyber thinking for you, so you don't have to. There's also this stuff off search service that was way more involved than I could put on this slide. So if you're on the CISA website, you'll see it. But essentially, it's how you move some of your data off of search engines. And there's a lot of different pieces of that based on which ones you're trying to do. So again, I think this is something to dive into individually, but it's one of their key recommendations. And then the last 2, develop and exercise a cyber incident response plan. And this one I was like, okay, I bet a lot of K-12 schools don't have this or haven't thought about this, but making a plan for things is something we do really well as K-12 educators. Again, CISA has this incident response plan resource. This is like a 2-pager that I have linked here, and it goes through in detail what you should include in it, how to do it. It's pretty detailed, and if you just follow that as a roadmap, I think you'll think through all of the key pieces of what needs to go in that plan. And then CISA does have regional offices. We are in Region 5, and I think that they recommend reaching out to them. But also, as I reviewed all this, I was like, this would be a good place. Whoever is going to be focusing on this for your school, this would be a good place to start. And I think they want to hear more from K-12, and they need to hear more from K-12, so they're not in a bubble just kind of thinking how this would work in real life settings. So, making contact with the CISA regional office is important. And then creating a training and awareness campaign at all levels. Again, if we've ever worked in a big organization, we have been the recipient of a training campaign, reminder emails or required trainings. But making sure that you've reviewed your employee handbook. That has a section on cybersecurity, acceptable use policies, escalation procedures. And on the CISA website, there are some free training programs, like one from Amazon, that anybody can take. So if you're like, I don't have time to figure this out, there are some resources linked on there that you could just point your staff to. So if that wasn't enough, there's 2 more recommendations. The second one is recognize and actively address resource constraints. And again, if you watch these ever, sometimes I make fun of things like this because it's like, really, of course we should address resource constraints, duh. Like it's that easy, just check the box, resource constraints addressed. So here are some specific suggestions that they provide. There is a state and local cybersecurity grant program, SLCGP. In Michigan, this is administered out of the Department of Technology, Management, and Budget, not out of the Department of Education. And so if you want to know more about this, this is another one where there were a lot of technicalities and special pieces. So I would just encourage you to email dtmb-sip-slcgp@michigan.gov and say, I'm interested in this program, can you help me? Honestly, that will be the most effective way for you to get information. The online resources do not give enough detail for a normal human to make much progress, but I'm sure you can get an answer if you email this. There are also free and low-cost services that can help you with these near-term improvements. And again, they're listed on the CISA website. I put the link here. But if you're on the main page, there's a step-by-step walkthrough, and this is directly linked. And then I thought this was a really interesting recommendation. We all have technology providers, so asking more of them. And they had some really good specifics here. So when you're doing procurement or doing renewal, make sure you're not charged extra for multi-factor authentication and logs. And, for myself as a non-expert in this, I guess I would take this list of questions with me to the vendor meeting or when I was having the conversation, or give it to my tech person and say, ask these questions. Being aware of the SSO tax. So there's this practice of charging an organization more to connect a service to your organization's single sign-on. And I guess that is not something that is industry standard or acceptable. And then every product comes with a hardening guide, which I learned are the set of steps that make the product less dangerous or less vulnerable to attacks. And so you should find that guide and follow the steps that it has. And then partnering with other schools to work with the same vendors. This is probably one of the recommendations that resonated the most with me, and that I hope you take from this, that, I know you're all in the Grand Valley Charter School network, so you work together in a lot of ways, but if the more you can partner with others who are doing the same thing, the easier this lift will be. And this actually relates to the last recommendation on here. Consider moving your on-premises services to the cloud. And so the report says you cannot say with certainty that the cloud is always better, but that in general, having on-premises services, like an individual who's maintaining all of this security, is usually harder than using cloud-based services. So I think if you think about partnering with other schools to figure out how they're doing this and using some of the cloud services, those are 2 ways to lower individual burden. And again, this is a lot for one school leader, one person to do when it's not really their area of expertise. And that was a spoiler alert for their third recommendation: focus on collaboration and information sharing. So there's 2 cybersecurity collaboration groups, MS-ISAC and K-12-6. Joining one of those would probably be a good shortcut to information that you could use, take all the world of cybersecurity and distill it down into K-12 for you. Work with other information sharing organizations, and then building a relationship with CISA. And as I mentioned earlier, reporting those incidents. So the website is easy, it's CISA.gov/report. and they want you to report all kinds of incidents all the time. And that helps with data collection, but it also helps them build tools and infrastructure to help you, and it helps us understand as a nation where we are in terms of our vulnerabilities. So I know data reporting can be hard, but if you have time to report things, that is a really important step. Okay, so I sat with all of this and I was like, I'm a school leader, I'm watching this presentation. Right about now, I'm like, I don't know what a K-12-6 is, and I'm a little bit stressed. So here's where I would start if I were you. Do one thing first. I would go back through this PowerPoint and go to CISA.gov and look through the resources that are linked there. And then review those recommendations and start on the high priority steps. Again, if you don't have multi-factor authentication, work on getting that. Like that would be a noticeable improvement in your cybersecurity. Reach out to that CISA Region 5 office and just say, hey, I'm a school leader, I want to do this right, but I need help. See what they can do for you. And then, as I already mentioned, I think considering reaching out to GVSU Charter School office and asking if there could be a small subcommittee or a working group, or just informally with your school leader networks or within your management companies, say, can we work together on this? I think this is one of those where we don't need to do it as many times as there are schools. We tend to do that in education. We're so hyper-local. This can be something collaborative. And thank you for joining for today's Cybersecurity Research into Action.